Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who has joined us on WebEx or is now watching this video. Welcome to a briefing on the meetings of the Convention on Biological Diversity taking place in Geneva next month. We will focus on the preparations for the resumed sessions of the 24th meeting of the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical, and Technological Advice, the third meeting of the Subsidiary Body on Implementation, and the open-ended working group on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, to be held in Geneva from 14 to 29 of March this year. Today, we have the pleasure to welcome virtually to Geneva the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as the chairs and co-chairs of the bodies I have just mentioned, 3 weeks ahead of welcoming them in person to Geneva. This briefing today is convened within the framework of the Geneva Environment Network, a network hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme and supported by Switzerland, includes over 100 institutions or secretariats that make this region one of the global hubs for environmental governance. Key actors of the Geneva Biodiversity Cluster are following the event also today, and some might be interacting during the Q&A and discussion part of this event. We have convened or co-convened in the past 3 months various events in preparation of the March meetings, engaging with the Convention Secretariat and also with various organizations that will be joining the negotiations in Geneva. This is a busy year for the Global Environmental Agenda, with many conventions holding their conference of the parties and various preparatory events. Yesterday, we were discussing with our colleagues from the CITES Convention the preparation of their standing committee meeting, which will take place in Lyon just before the Geneva meetings we are discussing today. We have seen in the past 2 years that to accommodate the constraints of online and hybrid negotiations, those who follow the environment portfolio in the permanent missions, in capitals and in other institutions, have been indeed extremely busy and almost non-stop in negotiations or other preparatory meetings. Let me, I already mentioned that we have a biodiversity cluster in Geneva, but let me just come back on that point, saying that indeed biodiversity and nature, because I see some of the colleagues that have joined us for this briefing, biodiversity and nature conservation are an important topic for International Geneva, and some of the key institutions headquartered here engaged in safeguarding nature are indeed, as I just mentioned, attending the briefing and might interact in the Q&A session. Before we start indeed the discussions on the preparations for the Geneva meetings, let me just remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of this briefing will be made available on the webpage of this event. My colleagues have been sharing the link in the chat. Throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box. We will answer these during the discussion Q&A session. So let's start, and it's our pleasure to turn to Switzerland to welcome you all to this briefing, and soon physically to Geneva. It's my pleasure to turn to Norbert Bartsch-Lorcher, head of the Rio Conventions at the International Affairs Division of the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. Norbert, over to you.
Thank you, Diana, and warm welcome also from my side. I can assure you that Switzerland was very disappointed when we had to accept that we had to postpone the negotiation meetings that were scheduled for the process in order to be ready for the coming CBD COP15 planned initially for 2020. We were actively engaging in virtual meetings, but we had to agree that virtual meetings can be helpful. They can pass information, but really negotiations, I think we have to meet face by face. And therefore, my government is glad that we could support the process and that we could support the Secretariat in hosting after a break of 2 years without any physical meetings, that we can have it here in Geneva in a month's time. Geneva is the ideal place, I guess. We have very good meetings facilities. We have a reliable health system, particularly important now. We have, as Diana mentioned, an environmental expertise here in Geneva. And of course, and that's why many of you are taking part in this briefing, we have also a network of missions that can support this briefing and these meetings that the CBD is organizing here in Geneva. In particular, also during these pandemic times, I think it's always good if a mission on the spot can help the delegations to attend and to cope with the measures, the sanitary measures that we have to follow. Now, Switzerland has, because also of this cluster of environmental facilities, environmental organizations, have always been aware that synergies among the process are very important. We have to coordinate the different processes, and we have to make sure that this common framework will not just be the framework for the CBD, but for all biodiversity-related conventions, and even more, also the sister conventions, the Rio sister conventions, climate and desertification, but also chemicals are relevant for addressing the biodiversity crisis that we are all facing. Therefore, we organized a Bern process, as it is called, inviting all these conventions to sit around the table and to see how can we make it happen that this new framework will be a really comprehensive one, and that it will be also owned by the other conventions that I just mentioned. And owned means that these conventions will have not only to endorse it, but they should already be involved when we are negotiating it. And therefore, it is important that these conventions can also take part in this round that we will have next month in Geneva. It will help the implementation, and it will also be possible to have a view, a comprehensive view of where do we stand commonly in implementing this. And for this common view, it is very important that we create platforms that allow us to have a holistic approach and to have an overall view of the whole process. And therefore, Switzerland, together with UNEP and the European Union, developed an instrument that is called DART, a digital reporting tool, that will allow all reports for the biodiversity-related conventions and even further to be on one spot and to exchange information, to make cross-reference, and to help to delegations and governments to understand where are we, what could we learn from other processes, from other countries, as this platform will be very transparent. And this is for us a good reason also to support these global biodiversity framework negotiations by, as I said, helping to make them happen here in Geneva. For us, just two more points. For us, it is important that we will have a framework that is focusing on ambitious targets, if possible, with numeric values. And that's why my government was also behind, from the beginning, behind the 30 by 30 target. Just because we know that conservation and the survival of biodiversity needs surface. Without surface, they will disappear. We will not be able to stop the decline of biodiversity. But this is just an example, and we will, of course, continue to negotiate. We will hopefully also have a review mechanism that will allow to learn from each other, to understand where we are commonly and what are the contributions by each of the parties. This is something that lacked in the last strategic program that CBD had, where we were not enough focusing on what really were we able to achieve and where do we stand in implementing. At the end, after the 10 years, we had to realize that none of the IG targets has been completely reached. So these are elements that for my country are very important. Of course, also finance is always an important issue. My government is in favor of a broadening of the finance, which means domestic and international money. It means public and private money. And it is important that we will also align the financial flows. It doesn't make sense if we invest 50 millions in helping biodiversity, but at the same time we give 200 million subsidies for activities that harm biodiversity. This, I think, is more and more understood, and therefore it is important, as I said, that financial flows public but also private financial flows, private investments take into account biodiversity concerns. This, in a nutshell, the position of Switzerland. I hand back to you, Diana. And as I said before, Switzerland is very glad that we can host and be helpful in bringing this process forward so that we are ready to adopt the new Global Biodiversity Framework in Kunming at COP15. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Norbert, for these welcoming remarks on behalf of Switzerland. It is now our pleasure to turn to the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and we have with us his Deputy Executive Secretary, David Cooper. David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana, and thank you to you and the Geneva Environmental Network for convening this briefing. My thanks also to Norbert for welcoming us today and also in a few weeks' time, and for the continued support by Switzerland of not only the CBD but the other biodiversity related conventions and the synergies among them. I think it's with a mixture of relief and excitement that we're approaching these meetings next month in Geneva. Excitement because it's the first in-person meetings, as Norbert said, since Rome 2020, when we had the second meeting of the working group hosted at FAO. And while we've made a lot of progress virtually through many online meetings, and I really want to pay tribute to chairs and co-chairs, Ezekiel, Charlotte, Basil and Francis, whom we'll hear from a little bit later, as well as all those involved in that process. There is, as Norbert mentioned, recognition that we'll only really move to the real negotiations when we get together in person, and this therefore will be a really critical set of meetings in preparing for the second part of COP15, which we hope will take place later this year. And of course, the main focus of I think everyone's attention will be the negotiations on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and all of the other decisions that will support that. We know from the IPBES global assessment, we know from our own assessments under the convention, GBO5 and others, that not only are we losing biodiversity at unprecedented rates in human history, this is jeopardizing the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a crisis for biodiversity, but it's essentially a crisis for humanity. And in fact, that was recognized by ministers at the high level segment of the first part of COP15, which took place, as you know, in Kunming last October, in the Kunming Declaration, which recognized the biodiversity crisis along with climate change, the health pandemic crisis we're through, and others as essentially an existential threat. And also recognizing that to address this threat, we will need transformative change. And this is what the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will need to deliver. It's not only for the CBD, as Norbert said, but for all MEAs, and indeed for the UN system and for the whole of government, whole of society. So we will have these three bodies meeting in Geneva, the working group on Post-2020, focusing, of course, on the framework itself and the outcome framework that it embodies of goals and targets. That working group will also address this critical issue of finding a solution on digital sequence information and ensuring that we have the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. But we will also have meetings of our two subsidiary bodies, the Subsidiary Body on Implementation, SBI, and the Science Body, SBSTTA. And these will be negotiating a number of decisions on resource mobilization, for example, on mechanisms for review of implementation through SBI, for example, on the monitoring framework under Subsidiary, for example, that will be critical part of the total package to be adopted in Kunming. And so all three of these bodies are important, and the interactions among them are really important. And that's why these meetings are being organized together, and that's why they're being organized in a integrated manner. I'll refer participants to the documents that are on the CBD website, and I see that you put a link in the chat here. It's also, there's a link in the invitation to this meeting for those that are not familiar with where they are. They set out all of the details of the meetings, including through a scenario note, which contains an organization of work, so a timetable for those meetings. Let me briefly mention some of the logistical arrangements that are going to be in place in light of the pandemic. This will be essentially an in-person meeting. The face-to-face negotiations will take place in plenary and in contact groups in the meeting venue. Because of the need to ensure that the venue is not overcrowded, there are limits on the number of people that can be in the venue at any one time. And for that, but also to ensure that all delegates have easy access, all registered delegates will also have access to viewer access through our Interactio platform to all of the plenaries and all of the contact groups. And of course, the plenaries will also be webcast publicly. We will have a strong set of measures to keep people safe, recognizing that we need to keep everyone safe. Delegates are coming from many countries, from different situations. They will be going back to many countries with different situations. We will therefore be requiring vaccination. We will have a regular series of daily testing, and we will maintain a certain degree of social distancing, use of masks, and so on. So we will certainly taking these issues seriously to do our best to keep people safe, to reduce the risk of infection. The meetings themselves are, of course, as from the title, resume meetings. So they will continue from where the work of the working group in September and Substa and SBI last May left off. All three bodies have initiated work on essentially all of their agenda items. The stage we're at, as our chairs and co-chairs will point out, vary from case to case. In one or two cases, we'll be continuing the first reading, that is to say, hearing statements and hearing reactions from parties and observers in plenary. Many of the issues will be addressed, though, through contact groups, mostly contact groups that are re-established, resumed from the first session. The aim, of course, is to complete all of the agenda items, to work through the CRPs, the conference room papers, that is the draft recommendations where necessary, and then to develop and adopt the final recommendations to the COP and the MOPs in the L documents. And just to mention there and to stress that we are preparing through these three bodies recommendations, not only for the Conference of the Parties, but also for the meetings of the parties of the Cartagena Protocol and the Biosafety Protocol. A lot of preparation has been done. And again, I want to thank my colleagues in the Secretariat, the Bureau, and especially the chairs and co-chairs we're about to hear from. Just to note how we will start the meetings on the first day, on March the 14th. We will start with a joint opening plenary. And at this plenary, after hearing statements from the presidency and from the executive secretary, there will be an opportunity for regional groups and major stakeholder groups to make general statements on the work of the 3 meetings. And this will be the main opportunity for general statements. We will then move and sequentially open each of the 3 bodies during the course of the remaining day. And in those opening plenaries of each of the 3 bodies, of course, they will each adopt their organization of work, the timetable, which essentially, of course, it has been developed in synchrony. And they will begin looking at some of the substantive items as my colleagues, chairs and co-chairs will set out. So as I say, there's a lot of preparation. We're looking forward to a really productive meeting. This is where we have to see coming out of the meeting text. Maybe there may be a few brackets where there is still some disagreement, but we have to see the shape of the draft decisions that are going to the COP and the MOPS, in particular, of course, the shape of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. There will be a series of side events. They're available on the CBD website also for people to consult. Some of them will have virtual access, which will be indicated in the side event calendar. Certainly, we're looking for a lot of interest from the world towards these meetings. And as I say, we very much hope for serious negotiation among parties to take us well on the road to Kunming and well on the road to adopting an effective and ambitious post-2020 framework later this year in Kunming. So I'll leave it there for now. Of course, we can address any questions that may come up later. Thanks very much, Diana.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you also for adapting what you just presented to those that are less familiar with the CBD agenda. We have various permanent missions in Geneva that don't engage regularly with your conventions, so thank you also for this. We will now give the floor to the chairs and co-chairs of the various bodies convening in Geneva, and we will start by Ezequiel Benitez-Diaz, who is the chair of the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical, and Technological Advice. With that, Ezequiel, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers for this briefing to Geneva Permanent Missions and the Government of Switzerland and the Secretariat of CBD. I will start by reminding that the SBSTA is the Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical, and Technological Advice. This is a body established by Article 25 of the Convention as an open-ended intergovernmental scientific body to provide the conference of the parties and, as appropriate, its other subsidiary bodies with timely advice relating to the implementation of the Convention. These other subsidiary bodies can count like the protocols of Cartagena and Nagoya. And the idea is to provide this advice. So far, it's been 23 meetings of this body, more or less one each year since the existence of the convention, and has created about 240 recommendations to the conference of the parties. It has a SBSTA bureau, which is geographically balanced and in representation by the parties, 2 per region. The SBSTA chair is elected for 1 biennium, usually, with this exception with COVID pandemic. That includes 2 meetings of SBSTA, which I have the honor to chair at this time. The objectives for this period is to provide scientific and technical advice to the development of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and in particular, in form of a draft monitoring framework for this post-2020 framework. This is very important. And how are we going to measure in the future progress by parties in the implementation of the new framework that we will adopt at the COP? We also have the mandate to deliver fully against the established SBSTTA program of work, include other requests of scientific or technical nature. Many of those are also relevant for the implementation of the post-2020 framework. For example, synthetic biology, risk assessment on genetically modified organisms, One Health, agriculture, soil biodiversity. International collaboration requires to work with the World Health Organization, the FAO, and further work also on EPSAs, the ecologically and biological significant areas in the marine environment. The specific objectives for this 24 meeting of SBSTTA resume session is to continue and to finalize our work. I have to remind you that, as David mentioned, in this session, this very long session, we're going to have 3 meetings running in parallel. Each of the meetings has its own mandates. They are linked, but not mixed. So it's very important that delegations focus on the mandates and the documents for every meeting that are complementary, but there are specific issues that have to be delivered. For example, we're going to be working at different stages. We have advanced work already in 6 L documents, where we have the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5, the program of work of IPBES, the monitoring framework, synthetic biology, risk assessment, and agriculture. The idea is to consider and to adopt these documents for sending to COP as recommendations. Also, to make further progress on draft recommendations contained in CRP documents for invasive alien species, for marine EPSAs, marine conservation and sustainable use, for approval and eventual adoption. Also, we should work on a non-paper on health with a view to eventually approve it as a CRP and then to be adopted as an L document. And to work on the non-paper on the monitoring framework to eventually approve as a CRP and then as part of document L3. We're going to have a number of sessions to contact groups to address these points, as also David mentioned. Some cases we are mostly at the end of the road with L documents, but some other issues we are departing from CRP documents, or even some of them from a non-paper document, which requires quite a lot of work. On the modalities of work program for SBSTTA, we will have contact groups on certain issues, in particular the monitoring framework, which will have a number of sessions. Contact groups are chaired by 2 colleagues, geographically balanced, developed and developing countries. Contact groups on the monitoring framework to build on the discussions in relevant contact groups on post-2020. The organization of work foresees staggered sessions accordingly, so we're going to see how negotiations are evolving on the framework and what are the connections with the preparation for the monitoring framework as this is evolving along the days in Geneva. Also, the colleagues of some contact groups may develop and release informal concept notes on how they intend to approach the work. So after the plenary, we will start immediately with contact groups that will meet mainly on afternoons and evening sessions to start working and to make as much progress as possible to prepare documentation that has to be approved in the corresponding plenary sessions of SBSTTA. So recommendations for SBSTTA-24, including draft decisions for perusal by the COP, to be further considered at COP15 incoming. So we will address issues on the framework, but also the different mandates we have by the COP to SBSTTA. So with this, I finished my presentation. Looking forward to see you in Geneva, and I am also open to questions when we finish this round of presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel, for this presentation adapted to the stakeholders that don't necessarily know well the CBD functioning. It's now a pleasure to turn to another chair, Carlotta Sorkvist, who is the chair of the Subsidiary Body on Implementation. Carlotta, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana, and good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. First, I would like to thank the organizers for this possibility to this briefing today. I think it's very useful, and also many thanks to the government of Switzerland for all preparations and the CBD Secretariat. I have been asked to give you a brief update on the SBI and the work what's intended to achieve at this Geneva meeting. And to start off, I would like to just say a few words about SBI. Like SBI and Subsidiary Body of a convention, the chair. I am the chair of SBI. I'm elected for 2 years between the different COPs. Now, of course, in the pandemic, it has been continued for a longer period, but normally it's for 2 years' time. There are 4 functions or core areas of work of SBI. Review of progress of implementation, strategic action to enhance implementation, strengthening means of implementation, and operation of the convention and the 2 protocols of the convention, the Geneva Protocol on Biosafety and the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. And as Isiki mentioned about SBSTTA, the work of SBI is mandated by the COP, conference parties of the convention, but also by the meeting of parties for the protocols. So we will work both on issues related to convention and issues related to Geneva Protocol and Nagoya Protocol. We do have a very full agenda this meeting. I just would like to highlight some of the agenda items. As mentioned, we have done, of course, a lot of work last year. We did have a virtual session in May, June, together with back to the SBSTTA. And so we have gone through almost all agenda items, but in some agenda items we have done the first reading. We continue to work also on next step, but on other ones we are different stages in the preparations. So to see here, review of progress, agenda item 3 and 4 is also as linked to this core part of SBI work. And then agenda item 5 that has different agenda items within it. I just would like to highlight, we will discuss a new gender plan of action, and that has been intersessional work since we met last year, so it will be a new draft. It is also discussing, continue discussing the implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Geneva Protocol on biosafety, and also a new draft on communication strategy. Resource mobilization already been mentioned. It's one part that is more linked to resource mobilization work on convention, but also one part of it, B, that relates to the guidance to the financial mechanism, GEF. Capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. Also important issues that will continue with the contact group. Agenda item 8. Cooperation with other convention international organization initiatives is also linked to what has been mentioned by Norbert in the beginning about the Bern process and the linkages between the different conventions. It will be continue our first reading on this agenda item. We did a start last year, but we'll continue because it couldn't conclude that discussion. And then on agenda item 9, mechanism reporting, assessment, review, implementation. This one is very much linked also to work on SBSTTA, on the monitoring framework, but also, of course, on the Post-2020 as such. And then they do have some other items, review of effectiveness, mainstreaming of biodiversity, and agenda item 12 and 13 is linked to the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. At this meeting, it's important for me to finish the mandate given by COP14 and also the COP MOPS of the protocol. We'll continue where we left, pick up where we left off last year. So that means that for some items we continue to discuss the CRPs. From others, it just will formally adopt LDOCs that has already been agreed last session. But as said before, I will resume first reading on agenda item 8. We'll continue with contact groups work, and I plan to have 5 contact groups one on resource mobilization, one on review mechanism, one on capacity building, one on gender plan of action, and one on Cartagena Protocol implementation plan. Regarding LDocs, as said, some LDocs was already agreed at the virtual session last year, but we need to formally adopt them. There are some brackets and try to use informal processes for advance the consensus on outstanding issues, but I will not reopen them for discussion because we will not have so much time to do that. So if so, we need to take decisions on the LDocs with some brackets, but that needs then to be resolved at the COP or COP MOPS. Yes, very briefly here you can see that we do have different contact groups. All information is found in the scenario note that is on the web page, so you can see more details on that. Just to mention finally that there are of course a lot of linkages, as already mentioned, linkages between SBI and Subsidiary, but also on the work that will be done to prepare the new Global Biodiversity Framework. And several SBI agenda items are directly linked, like resource mobilization, for instance, or review implementation. But more or less all of them there are linkages, and it's clearly indicating the different mandates for agenda items. After the first virtual session we did have last year, all outcome was given to the Post-2020 co-chairs so they could take it into account when prepared the first draft. But parties will, of course, decide what elements or level details is needed in the GBF as part of a Working Group 2020 deliberations. So we'll see exactly how we will continue. We need to continue to have close coordination, of course, since there are so many linkages. So I think that was all I had to say now. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Just to once again to say that we do have a lot of different agenda items. Some of them have been more advanced at the virtual session than others, but all information can be found on the website. Thanks. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Carlotta, for this also comprehensive presentation. It's now our turn to turn to the. It's now time, sorry, to turn to the two co-chairs of the CBD open-ended working group for Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We have with us Francis Ogwal and Basile Van Havre. I will let them decide who takes the floor as they have jointly prepared their intervention. And want also to thank them for being with us. Who is starting, Basile or Francis?
Thank you, Francis. Do you want to start?
Well, I will start, but I don't know how far I will go. I'll try to stop somewhere so that you can continue. Can you hear me?
We can hear
very
you.
Well.
Okay, I'm saying that I'll just try to start from somewhere and stop somewhere, then co-chair will finish the remaining bit. Just to say that when it comes to the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the working group, the open-ended working group, is the negotiating body of that framework. So the text of that framework is being negotiated with or by that working group. To date, we have had 2 physical meetings of that working group, and we could have had the 3rd one, but because of COVID, it had to be postponed. Now it is planned to be held, of course, together with Subsidiary and SBI meetings in Geneva. What we are now calling 3.2, the 3.2 meeting of the working group. So the mandate of the open-ended working group is derived from decision 1434, and this process is party-led. It is a party-led process, meaning the co-chairs will do their best to take on board what the parties will tell them to do. So much of what needs to go into the framework will be negotiated by parties, but we have that very challenging role of trying to capture views of parties and stakeholders into the framework. What is going to happen at the next meeting, which is planned in March in Geneva, is that we are going to carry forward the contact groups that we had in the first part of the meeting of the working group. That is the first part of the third meeting, at sometime September last year. So co-chair will dwell a little bit more on those contact groups. So those are the contact groups we are going to go forward with in the physical meetings. But just to say here before I hand over to co-chair that we have got working documents for this physical meeting, which is coming up. The first one is draft 1 of the framework. That is the main document that we are going to work with. But there are other documents that parties will have before them. We have the co-chair's reflection document. Now, the co-chair's text has tried to bring into perspective what we had from the 3.1 or the meeting we had in September last year virtually. We've tried to guide parties, to give views, to give direction where we think we could, where we think that parties could borrow and see whether what we are suggesting can help them move forward. So that is the other document that is before parties, before stakeholders that we have to refer to when they are negotiating. And then we have got the co-leads report as well. So the co-leads report, the draft 1, and the co-chair's reflection, those are the three critical documents that actually we are going to have during that meeting. So I think at this point in time, co-chair, you could take on from there.
Thank you, Francis. And it's a pleasure to be able to talk to this Geneva community. I hope you can hear me and perhaps see me. If not, let me know. Francis explained the process we went through. So we are at that point of resuming negotiation. Colleagues from the Secretariat and the chair of the others two subsidiary committee have talked to you about the structure. Similarly, we will have 5 contact groups. 4 of those are structured along the line of the draft, and we're working very closely with the co-leads, similarly to what is done in the other ones, in terms of ensuring that there is predictability and consistency in the work of those contact groups. Our expectation in terms of the process is that on one hand, with everybody has put to good use the extra time, and we're probably more prepared than we ever dreamed about it, about being prepared when we started 2 years ago. However, on the other side of the ledger, we recognize that there's been a long time since people have been able to talk to each other, and those personal links may have dwindled a little bit in the face of working in isolation. In addition, we realize also there is a significant number of new people that we will need to integrate in the process. So the key advice that we're giving to participants is to try to be as familiar as you can with the decision as outlined by Francis, but also with the work done in the previous meeting, the mandate we have, and try not to restart the negotiation or repeat position, etc. We welcome new ideas and engagement, and it's not a question of shutting down anybody, but it's a question of trying to make the best possible use of the very short time we have in front of us to maximize the outcome and have the best possible outcome of this meeting in preparation for the negotiation in Kunming. So we're really, I think everybody is excited about resuming our real work face to face. We're very happy about getting back together in Geneva, and we're certainly thanks Norbert and Switzerland for hosting us in such a historical moment where we can restart our negotiation. So Diana, this is pretty much what Francis and I had in mind in terms of a briefing, but we're happy to follow your lead in terms of further explanation as needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have already a few questions that have appeared both in the Q&A or in the chat that we will bring to the panelists. But before we, so feel free to add some questions there. And before we move into that part, let me just, I am bringing just to the panel two of the representatives of the Geneva Biodiversity Cluster that will also be welcoming you in Geneva and that are looking forward for these meetings. We have also the two other conventions on board, but they haven't so far requested the floor. But I'm just bringing here Sonia Peña from IUCN, and I have also brought Luca from WF just for 1 or 2 minutes for a short statement, and then we will move on with the question. Sonia, over to you if you can unmute yourself.
Yes, hello, Diana. Thank you very much, everyone. I think as everyone in Geneva and elsewhere, we're extremely excited in IUCN about the resumed meetings that are about to happen next month here in Geneva, our neighborhood. And we're looking forward from IUCN to continue to contribute to the discussions and the negotiations around the Global Biodiversity Framework. And I think more importantly, to see it implemented later on, once it's approved and adopted in Kunming. Furthering the points that were made at the beginning by Norbert on the issue of the Global Biodiversity Framework being, a framework that it's indeed global, and furthering the comments made on the importance of the synergies agenda here and bringing everyone on board to contribute to this framework, I would ask a question rather than and see whether all the panelists could maybe react to that. Thinking about Geneva as a hub for many organizations and issues that are dealt with here, including trade, human rights, jobs, and many others, health, for instance, in addition to the environment, of course, and biodiversity. How do you see this wider community in the Geneva and beyond engaging in the development and also the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework? I leave it at that and look forward to seeing you all in Geneva next month. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And before I give the floor to Luca, maybe Basile, Francis, David, and others, if you want to interact here.
I can offer quickly some reaction. As far the GBF, we want that GBF to be different from the previous one, and one of the key characteristics is what we call being a framework for all, which is linking to other process. Our sense and what the parties have told us is we cannot be different. We cannot be successful if we're not engaging whole of government and whole of society. So definitely the link to health, to human rights, to labor, and to health are critical. And we're trying to build a framework which will be an open infrastructure allowing others to connect. And that means encouraging and setting goals or targets that can be picked up by organization and use, trying to have language that is easy to understand by all. So definitely it's a real opportunity to be in Geneva, and we're welcoming your engagement and your advice in terms of how we can do better. Thank you.
And indeed, the meetings are also happening during an important session of the Human Rights Council, and we had the pleasure to co-welcome you with other platforms to one of the preparatory events to the Geneva meetings addressing this particular topic. We have also Luca here, so I will now, Luca Cinatti from the WWF International, I will give him the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody, and we are also looking forward to see all of you in Geneva, finally, for a physical negotiation. This will be a very critical meeting, of course, because we know how important is the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And we really hope that we will set the level of ambition at the right level. So we know that we need to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030 and achieve a nature positive world by 2030. And we hope that this will be really the starting level of ambition. And we know that to achieve this, we need a number of elements. We know that we need to increase our conservation effort that are important, but also that we need to do much more to address the drivers of biodiversity loss. And in particular, we need to have the footprint of production and consumption, but we need to address also many other elements, from resource mobilization to arm of subsidy, as Norbert was underlying. And we need, of course, to make sure that the framework will be implemented, because this will be the critical element, and a right-based approach, an all of government, all of country approach will be absolutely critical on that. And actually, I have also one question, a more practical one, because of course we know that the participation of civil society, of indigenous people, local community, NGOs is very important for this negotiation. And we are wondering if, given the change of rule in Switzerland and the better condition in terms of COVID, if there is a plan to open a bit more the space for participation at the venue of observer. Thank you.
This is a question. Maybe David, you could step in here.
Thank you, and I certainly share much as what has been said just now in terms of what the framework must do in addressing the drivers of biodiversity loss, the direct drivers, the underlying drivers. And to do that, of course, everyone has to be involved in its implementation, and therefore everyone has to be involved in the discussions in preparing. And certainly, I think the CBD, the Secretariat, and this, of course, especially the parties, have always emphasized the importance of wide stakeholder engagement, engagement in particular of indigenous peoples and local communities, and indeed this is set out in the mandate that the co-chairs and that we all have for this process from COP14. We indeed expect a high participation of observers as well as from parties in the upcoming meetings, and we do expect that we will need to maintain the limitations that we've already announced. Given the size of the venue, we will be and looking at the registration we have received, we would see that we would have, maybe around 500 people from parties at any one time, and also another 400 from observers or more at any one time. That's based on registrations received at the moment. So certainly we do expect a pretty good balance between party delegates and observer delegates in the meetings. But we feel that given the ongoing pandemic situation globally, it's unlikely that we'd be able to further relax the rules that we have. We will be looking to see if there can be additional access for regions of parties and for major groups, in addition to those for individual delegates. We'll see if that's possible in light of the circumstances and in light of the total and final registration figures when we get them. But looking at the moment, we're pretty close to capacity. We note, of course, that participation, even if the number of people in the venue at any one time is limited, that delegations, both parties and observers, can rotate those that are there. So every party, every observer can be represented at all times, and that they can rotate the actual delegates that represent them. And of course, we also, all registered delegates will have full viewer access to the discussions, both the plenaries and the contact groups. I think I'll leave it for there.
Maybe just two logistical elements, because there were questions in the chat about that. It's about the daily agenda of the meetings. Is it already available on the website? When will it be available? And then the second question, David, maybe I don't think it has been mentioned yet. It's to remind everybody the deadline for the registration.
So the planned organization of work is on the website in the document that's called Scenario Note and Organization of Work. The same document is there under each of the three bodies on the CBD website under the official documents tab. Once the meeting gets away, there will be a live calendar on the website, as has been the practice at all of our recent meetings for many years now, where everyone will be able to see the current and upcoming sessions. That will give them also a direct link to the relevant documentation, as well as a direct link to the online platform for registered participants. And that will be updated as necessary if the Bureau decides to adjust the schedule, which, as I say, the current schedule is in the documentation. The initial deadline for registration has passed. That has been extended, though, to the 28th of February. And so, yeah, please make sure that you register on time. It is extremely important for us in terms of planning and in terms of making sure that we can have maximize the participation in the meetings and have a good view and understanding of the total numbers that are likely to be trying to have access to the meeting at any one time.
I see that Ezekiel has brought the hand up, but just to remain on these logistics, you mentioned before that the plenary and the substantive parts will all be streamed live, so that people who are not in Geneva can also, or are in Geneva but that cannot access the venue, can follow what's going on. And I think that our efforts have also been made to make sure that the rooms for the side events are also equipped, and probably a lot of the side events will also be made hybrid, so that people can follow.
Yes, this will depend on the organizers of each side event also. The links to those side events will be available in the side event calendar.
Thank you very much. Ezekiel, you have the floor. And then we will take on a question that came into the chat.
Thank you very much. Just to remind that this first face-to-face meeting in quite a long time is very important. This is an assemblage that, like a wine, that we agree with my colleagues, the chair of SBI and the co-chairs of the open-ended working group. So it was very complex to find the balance in the calendar you have in front of you for so many days, where mornings will be mainly devoted for plenaries and the open-ended working group, afternoons and evening sessions for contact groups in SBI and Substan. It's very important to realize that we are not departing from zero. So with the limited time, we should go straight to business. And this is because it will be a lot of appetite for participations of observers and so on, but we need to go straight to our business in every meeting to make the most progress as possible. And of course, the draft monitoring framework, which is one of the main priorities for Substan, should be followed negotiations on the open-ended working group. So as long as it evolves, we should go together. This is like a chicken and egg issue, but we are doing our best you have a draft monitoring framework to be approved by the COP that it will require later the support of an ATEC and then a subsequent SBSTA meeting to tune up the framework. So please be realistic that we will do our best to have a good monitoring framework draft. It will not be finished totally. We will have a very good approach according as the global framework is evolving during these meetings in Geneva. So it's important to realize how far we can go, how we can make the best use of the limited time we will have for every single agenda item of the 3 different meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that Carlotta has also raised her hand. Please, Carlotta.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this possibility to also comment again. I also would like, as just maybe in line with what has just been said by Ezekiel, that it's important to remember that we have done a lot of work when we did have our virtual sessions, and we now have a possibility to conclude the work of SBI. I do understand, of course, that it has been a time since we met, and there are many new ideas coming in all the time, and that's good, of course. But we also need to be aware of a limitation of time. And as said by Ezekiel, we have tried to set the agenda together for all 3 meetings, and it was very difficult because I think we all felt that we need more time than we actually could to have in this schedule. But I'm also confident that we will be able to conclude the work of SBI. But we need, please check all the documentation and the annotated agendas to be aware where we are in the process of a specific agenda item. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carlotta. And so there was this question that from Yves Lador of Earth Justice on how will the outcome of the working group be followed by the second segment in the COP in Kunming. It was partially answered. How far do you expect the work in Geneva to go in terms of final product? And here maybe Basil and Francis.
Maybe I'll start and Francis can add to it. We have a lot in front of us to do in Geneva, and this is the last meeting of the open-ended working group before we get to the COP. I think our goal is to end up with a text with as little bracket as possible, and so that we can limit the amount of negotiation that will take place in Kunming. How far we will be able to go toward these goals, I don't know. I'm convinced that people are coming, the delegates are coming into Geneva with the intention of reaching that goal, and that a lot of energy and efforts will be used to reach that. If I may, at the same time, I can probably answer the other question about the structure and how. That's the question from Marianne. So I think in draft 1, and you've seen the progression from draft 0 to draft 1, and from draft 1 to the reflection document. There is a number of elements that are consistent. So I suspect that one way or the other, those elements will be in the final document. There is also a number of questions around the structure, and we're looking forward to the discussion. It would be preposterous for us to try to predict the outcome of those discussions. But if we are to address the direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, there is, we will find those elements in the end. But Francis, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair. I think I'll not add to what you already said. You have explained that. What possible I will add on is the aspect of DSI. This is another very, very important discussion that is happening in parallel, I would say, with the post-2020. We have got the working group discussing the text of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but the same working group also is expected to actually come up with a recommendation to the COP on how we are going to handle DSI in respect to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So we also expect the working group to reach agreement on DSI. As some of you may already know, DSI has got that opportunity to attract a lot of discussion as well. Just like post-2020, there are areas where parties seem to have reached some level of agreement. You'll call it the convergence zones or convergence areas, but there are also still some areas, divergence areas that needs to be tackled. So that is the other very important discussion that we are going to have during the physical meeting that will take place in Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you. Basil, anything else you would like to add here? Okay, thank you very much. We see here that it seems that there are no other questions. I ask you to be also adapt what you would be presenting to who is not familiar to the CBD agenda, which you all did very well, and I think everything was very comprehensive. So I think we can move if there are no more questions coming up. I will give the floor to each of you, and and ask you. Give you 30 seconds or 1 minute. We have time, so you can take more time. I might end with, let's see with whom we start and with whom we end. So give you 30 seconds, 1 minute for your wishes for the meetings in Geneva. And so let's start by David, and then we do Switzerland, and then we do the co-chairs in the same order we did them at the beginning. David, over to you.
Thank you. So certainly we hope and expect parties to engage in real negotiations to build on the text-based work they did at Subsidiary and SBI to ensure that we come out with some agreed text on the post-2020 framework itself as well. But of course, in doing so, to be cognizant of the level of ambition that is necessary in this framework for it to achieve what parties have said they wish it to achieve, which is the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, and as set out in the Kunming Declaration, also this need to halt, reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, to put biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030, and certainly this will require ambition across the board. So looking at all aspects of biodiversity, but looking at the drivers, and of course looking at the means of implementation as well.
Thank you, David. Norbert, your wishes as host country.
Well, our wishes, of course, is that this conference can happen in the best conditions possible, and that the health situation will not affect it. This is certainly the most important wish that Switzerland as host country of these meetings has. But I think reflecting on Sonia's question and also the role of the missions, I think we all understood that biodiversity is another important existential crisis, not only climate. And so more and more people are aware that biodiversity is not just creating new protected areas and saving the dolphins, but that it has to do with almost all aspects of our life. And therefore, as also Basil mentioned, Geneva is a perfect crossroads for all these different interests, be it trade, be it health, be it human rights, be it development, be it labor rights. We have to understand that we cannot stop the loss of biodiversity just by focusing on conservation, but we have to, the drivers, as Ipes clearly mentioned, it has to do with our way of produce products and consume products, be it in agriculture, be it in forestry, but also industrial production. This all has an impact on biodiversity. And here in Geneva, I think that there is a knowledge in many fields, and I'm very happy that the missions are following this process, also learning what is there. Maybe they're covering WTO And so they can also, for themselves and for their mission and for their government, make the link between trade and biodiversity. I think this is also one of the important results that I hope that we will see. And then supporting, the missions can also support delegations, as we heard. We have every day we have night sessions, which means that the poor delegates will really have a hard time and will be tired. So if you can facilitate their their participation in this conference, I think this is certainly very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert. I also want to mention, of course, we mentioned a lot the missions, but we saw some of the biodiversity stakeholders, but I see also online colleagues from UNCTAD, from FAO, and from other UN agencies who indeed also engage on biodiversity-related issues. With that, we move to Ezekiel for
thank you very much. Yes, as I said, we have a very special blend with good ingredients. All elements are there on the table, well, or on the website with all documents. We need to have good spirit and political will to make progress. I really hope we will have good outcomes for COP and a message to the planet. It's good to have hope. We know what to do. We need the active participation of all stakeholders. It is possible to achieve SDGs if we work all together. I think the outcomes of the Geneva meetings will be a strong call to global action. We need to be optimistic. We need to be proactive to produce good outcomes and continue with our work in order to adopt this the new global biodiversity framework for the next decade, and to start right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel. We move now to Carlota.
Thank you so much. Well, when I think about Geneva, I do really hope that we have done a great job last year. We have done so much work. We have a lot of virtual sessions. I think we are very well prepared to start our real negotiations on spot. And I do really hope we can conclude the work of SBI. And as mentioned before, so many of the agenda items of SBI are so important to support the work of GBF. It's items about resource mobilization, to better implementation, review mechanisms, gender plan of action, all these draft recommendations that I hope we can conclude on will be so important as the overall package that will be decided later on at COP. So I'm really looking forward to meet you all in Geneva and to make substantial progress. Thanks.
It's now my pleasure to turn to the co-chairs of the Open and Working Group on the Global Biodiversity Framework. So Basile and Francis, I let you decide who starts. Maybe Francis started before, so Basile could start. We can also move both of you to stage, please.
I'd arrange the other way. So Francis, can you start as planned, and then I'll follow up.
Okay, I thought actually that order was going to work as well, no problem. I think as co-chairs, my colleague will add, for us, our business is to deliver the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. That is what my co-chair and I, every day we wake up, that is what is ringing in our minds. So on my side, that is what I hope to see. In fact, if possible, a Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework that could have even no square bracket, because for us, draft one has no square brackets. So where will parties begin getting appetite to create square brackets? I hope that they could see some gesture from us and move forward from there with having no square brackets, because having square bracket means we are delaying discussion, we are delaying adoption. So we also hope that on my side, that the resources to implement that plan, capacity building, the monitoring framework, the gender action plan, and some of those key critical packages of the framework, that they are also agreed upon, because we do not want to repeat the mistake of the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011-2020, where we first adopted that strategic plan and began discussing resource mobilization, began discussing capacity building, began discussing monitoring framework, began discussing gender action plan. I mean, these were like things now that we're falling behind that strategic plan. But this time, all these things are happening at the same time. So it is my hope that the framework will see all this being adopted at the same time. And DSI, lastly, that also parties will be able to reach a compromise and have a clean text of DSI to take it to court. Thank you.
To follow up on Francis, I wanna touch and underline some of the points made by colleagues. David talked about ambition, and I think that's a point that needs to be underlined. We were asked to be driven by science, and science has spoken twice now in underlying the importance of addressing all drivers of biodiversity loss. But we want to do that in a realistic way that take into consideration the reality of socioeconomic development, population growth, etc. So this is a difficult task, one that you in the Geneva community tackle every day. So again, tying to another image, and Ezekiel has been talking about that special blend that as a cellar master is brewing in his cellar, and no doubt this will be a great vintage. But as any great vintage, it is not necessarily something you enjoy the day after you do it. You may want to have it mature for a little while. So keep in mind that we're working for here and now, doing that text for Kunmin, but we are part of a journey that is much longer, which is about how we increase the synergy between the various institutions, how we influence and cross-pollinate each other. So what we're doing is perhaps a lot larger than what we think it is. And where the team working on it is not only the people on the screen, but all the people listening to this conversation. So thank you very much, and back to you, Diana.
Thank you. I was thanking Basile and also thanking Francis also for their inputs here. I would like also to thank all the attendees that have joined us today and those who will be watching the video later on. And of course, we are all, and Basile just mentioned all the people working behind the scenes, everybody here has its role to play. So thank you also all you teams who have helped in setting up this briefing. And we will be helping up other resources we will put forward to bringing the Geneva stakeholders up to date on these important meetings that are going to take place in Geneva at CCG. Just bringing here to your attention just a few upcoming events. We stay with the biodiversity related issues very soon before the Geneva meetings and before the CITES meetings in Lyon. We are celebrating World Wildlife Day on 3rd of March, and we are hosting a few discussions on various interesting documentaries, and we will be hosting a discussion tomorrow on the Killing the Shepherd, and we have a few more coming up next week, as well as the official celebration of Worldwide Wildlife Day hosted by our colleagues of the CITES Secretariat. And with that, we can close this event, and we will keep our community, also the colleagues beyond posted, if we held more sessions in preparation of the Geneva briefings. And we at the Geneva Environment Network will be present. We are helping various actors organizing side events during the Geneva meetings, and we'll ensure that some of these events are also going to be hybrid, so that people who cannot be at the venue can also engage in a way or another. Thank you all very much. I wish you good work, and looking forward to see you all in Geneva in 3 weeks from now.